My beloved brothers and sisters, many of us are not tired because of what is happening in life, but because of what is happening inside our minds. Thoughts race, worries repeat, fears grow louder, and the heart feels restless even when nothing around us is wrong. We overthink the past, we panic about the future, and we forget that Allah is in control of every moment in between. This inner storm steals our sleep, drains our energy, and slowly disconnects us from peace. Islam does not ignore this struggle. Allah knows how heavy the mind can become when it carries too much alone. That is why calm is not found by silencing the world, but by reconnecting the heart to its creator. When the mind is loud, Allah is inviting you back to trust, remembrance, and surrender. Overthinking begins when trust weakens. Overthinking often begins quietly, not with panic, but with a subtle loss of trust. The heart slowly shifts from relying on Allah to relying on its own limited understanding. When trust weakens, the mind feels responsible for controlling outcomes it was never meant to carry. Thoughts multiply because the heart is no longer resting in certainty. Islam teaches us that Allah is Al-Wakil, the one who manages all affairs. When that belief weakens, the mind tries to replace divine control with constant analysis. This is where exhaustion begins. The believer starts replaying conversations, predicting futures, and fearing possibilities that may never occur. Overthinking is not a sign of intelligence, it is often a sign of spiritual fatigue. The heart forgets that Allah sees what we cannot see and plans with wisdom we cannot grasp. When trust is restored, the mind no longer feels the need to chase every thought. Calm returns when reliance returns. When trust in Allah weakens, fear fills the gap. The mind becomes a battlefield of what if scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. Islam teaches us that fear should never replace faith. Fear narrows perspective while trust expands it. Overthinking traps the believer in imagined futures, stealing peace from the present moment. Allah did not ask us to predict life, He asked us to trust Him through it. When trust is strong, the heart accepts uncertainty without panic. But when trust weakens, uncertainty feels unbearable. The believer then tries to think their way out of discomfort, forgetting that peace is not found through mental effort, but through surrender. Restoring trust softens fear. It reminds the heart that whatever lies ahead has already passed through Allah's wisdom. Overthinking also grows when the believer forgets that outcomes belong to Allah, not to effort alone. Islam encourages effort, but it forbids obsession. When trust weakens, effort turns into anxiety. The mind keeps working even when the body rests. Sleep becomes difficult because the heart is unsettled. The believer forgets that Allah rewards effort, not control. When trust is present, you do your best and leave the rest to Allah. When trust weakens, you do your best and still worry endlessly. This imbalance drains the soul. Allah never intended the human mind to carry the weight of destiny. That weight belongs to Him alone. Trust lifts that burden and allows the mind to rest. A weakened trust often leads to self-blame. The believer starts believing that every difficulty is their fault and every delay is a personal failure. This belief feeds overthinking. Islam teaches us that trials are not always punishments. Many are tests, lessons, or protection. When trust weakens, the believer forgets this truth and begins to overanalyze every hardship. The heart becomes harsh toward itself. Overthinking then becomes a form of self-punishment. Restoring trust brings mercy back into the heart. The believer remembers that Allah is gentle and that His decree is not cruel. This remembrance softens thoughts and calms the inner storm. Overthinking also intensifies when the believer seeks certainty in a world Allah designed to include uncertainty. Islam teaches us to live with trust, not guarantees. When trust weakens, uncertainty feels threatening rather than normal. The mind tries to remove uncertainty by thinking excessively. But certainty does not come from thinking, it comes from belief. Allah never promised us full understanding, but He promised guidance. Trusting that guidance quiets the need to know everything. Overthinking fades when the believer accepts that not all questions require answers right now. Faith fills the gaps where knowledge ends. When trust weakens, the believer may also become overly attached to control. Control feels like safety, but it is an illusion. Islam teaches us that control belongs to Allah alone. Overthinking is often the mind's attempt to regain a sense of control when trust is lost. The believer plans excessively, rehearses outcomes, and prepares for every possible scenario. This behavior feels productive, but it is emotionally draining. Trust teaches the heart to plan responsibly while accepting Allah's final decree. This balance brings calm. Without trust, the mind never stops working because it never feels secure. Overthinking thrives when remembrance fades, dhikr strengthens trust, and when dhikr weakens, overthinking grows louder. Islam teaches us that hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah, not in solving every problem mentally. When trust weakens, the believer turns inward instead of upward. Thoughts replace prayers. Worry replaces supplication. This shift amplifies mental noise. Returning to remembrance restores trust gently. The mind quiets when the heart reconnects with Allah. This reconnection does not remove problems, but it removes panic. A weakened trust also causes the believer to exaggerate problems. Small issues feel overwhelming and temporary difficulties feel permanent. Overthinking magnifies challenges because trust is no longer filtering perception. Islam teaches us that Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. When trust weakens, this promise is forgotten. The believer begins to doubt their ability to cope. Restoring trust reminds the heart that Allah chose this test because He knows the believer can endure it. This reminder reduces mental exaggeration and restores balance. Overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility. The believer may think that worrying shows care or seriousness, but Islam teaches us that excessive worry is not responsibility, it is misplaced reliance. True responsibility is doing what is required and trusting Allah with what is beyond control. When trust weakens, worry replaces reliance. This replacement creates mental fatigue. Trust restores clarity by separating what belongs to effort and what belongs to Allah. The mind becomes lighter when it knows where its role ends. When trust weakens, the believer may also seek reassurance from people instead of Allah. This dependence fuels overthinking because people's reassurance is inconsistent. Islam teaches us that reliance on creation increases anxiety, while reliance on the Creator brings peace. Overthinking grows when reassurance is temporary and fragile. Trust in Allah is stable. It does not fluctuate with opinions. Returning reliance to Allah quiets the mind because it rests on something unchanging. Overthinking keeps the believer trapped in the past or anxious about the future. Trust anchors the heart in the present. Islam teaches us to live today with faith and tomorrow with hope. When trust weakens, the mind abandons the present moment. It revisits old mistakes or imagines future pain. This mental movement steals peace. Restoring trust brings the heart back to now. The believer remembers that Allah is present in this moment, not only in imagined outcomes. A heart with weakened trust often struggles to accept delays. Delays feel like rejection. Overthinking then tries to decode Allah's timing. Islam teaches us that delays are part of divine wisdom. Trust accepts delays without panic. Overthinking resists them. When trust is restored, the believer understands that what is delayed may be protecting them. This understanding calms the mind and reduces mental strain. Overthinking also increases when trust in Allah's mercy weakens. The believer begins to fear punishment in every difficulty. Islam teaches us that Allah's mercy outweighs His wrath. Forgetting this truth makes the heart anxious. Trusting Allah's mercy softens fear. It reminds the believer that Allah is not waiting to harm them. This reassurance reduces obsessive thinking and restores emotional safety. When trust weakens, gratitude also fades. The mind focuses on what might go wrong instead of what Allah has already provided. Overthinking feeds on lack, not abundance. Islam teaches us that gratitude strengthens trust. When gratitude returns, trust follows. The believer notices blessings again. This awareness calms the mind and grounds the heart. As trust is rebuilt, overthinking loses its grip. The believer learns to hand thoughts back to Allah instead of wrestling with them endlessly. This surrender is not passive, it is faithful. The mind becomes quieter because the heart feels supported. Allah never intended you to carry everything alone. Trust reconnects you to that truth. In the end, overthinking begins when trust weakens, but peace returns when trust is restored. When you strengthen your reliance on Allah, the mind no longer feels responsible for the universe, it rests. And in that rest, clarity, patience and calm gently return. Remembering Allah calms the heart before it calms the mind. When the heart becomes unsettled, the mind follows soon after. Islam teaches us that calm does not begin in the thoughts, but in the heart. Remembering Allah soothes the heart first, and only then does the mind begin to slow down. Many people try to calm their thoughts through logic, distraction, or control, yet they remain restless. This is because the heart has not yet found peace. Allah created the heart as the center of tranquility, and when it reconnects with Him, calm flows naturally outward. Dhikr is not merely words on the tongue, it is a return of the heart to its source. When you remember Allah sincerely, you remind yourself that you are not alone, not forgotten, and not carrying life by yourself. This reassurance settles the heart. Once the heart feels safe, the mind no longer needs to race. Calm thinking follows calm believing. The heart is where fear takes root, and fear is what agitates the mind. When fear dominates the heart, the mind becomes noisy, restless, and overwhelmed. Islam teaches us that remembering Allah replaces fear with trust. When trust enters the heart, fear loses its grip. The mind then has no reason to panic. Dhikr gently shifts the heart from worry to reliance. You may still face uncertainty, but it no longer feels threatening. Allah's remembrance reminds the heart that every outcome is under divine care. This awareness calms emotional turbulence before addressing mental noise. Once the heart feels anchored, the mind begins to align with that stability. Calm thoughts emerge naturally when fear is replaced by faith. Many people attempt to silence their minds without addressing the state of their hearts. They try to force calm through effort, yet Islam teaches us that calm cannot be forced, it must be invited. Remembering Allah invites calm by restoring the heart's connection to Him. When the heart remembers Allah, it feels supported. Support reduces anxiety. Anxiety fuels overthinking. This chain explains why dhikr is so powerful. It does not argue with the mind, it reassures the heart. Once the heart feels reassured, the mind follows without resistance. Allah designed remembrance to work in this order. The believer who understands this stops struggling with thoughts and starts nurturing the heart instead. The Quran reminds us that hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah. This rest is deeper than mental quiet. It is emotional safety. When the heart rests, the mind no longer feels pressured to solve everything. Islam teaches us that not every problem requires immediate resolution. Remembering Allah teaches patience. Patience calms urgency. Urgency fuels mental noise. When urgency fades, thoughts slow down. This transformation begins with remembrance. A heart at rest does not rush the mind. It allows clarity to arrive naturally. Allah's wisdom unfolds gently in a calm heart. Remembering Allah also softens emotional pain. Pain unsettles the heart, and an unsettled heart agitates the mind. Dhikr reminds the believer that pain is not meaningless. Allah sees it, records it, and replaces it with reward. This understanding eases emotional heaviness. When the heart feels understood by Allah, the mind stops demanding constant explanations. Silence replaces mental chaos. Calm grows from within rather than being imposed from outside. This is why remembrance heals at a deeper level than distraction. When the heart remembers Allah, it remembers its purpose. Purpose brings direction. Direction reduces confusion. Confusion feeds overthinking. Islam teaches us that remembrance aligns the heart with why it exists, not to control life, but to trust Allah through it. This alignment gives meaning to uncertainty. When uncertainty has meaning, it no longer terrifies the mind. The believer becomes steady, thoughts slow because the heart is no longer lost. It knows where it belongs. Remembering Allah also restores balance between effort and surrender. The heart learns that effort is required, but outcomes belong to Allah. This balance relieves mental pressure. Overthinking often comes from trying to manage outcomes. Dhikr reminds the heart that outcomes are not its responsibility. This reminder lifts a heavy burden. When the burden lifts, the mind rests. Islam teaches us that surrender is not giving up, it is trusting up. That trust calms the heart deeply. The heart that remembers Allah becomes less reactive. Reactivity disturbs the mind. When emotions spike, thoughts scatter. Dhikr grounds emotions. It slows the heart rate of life itself. The believer begins responding instead of reacting. This shift brings composure. Composure quiets the mind. Allah grants this composure to those who return to Him consistently. It is not instant, but it is reliable. The heart learns calm before the mind understands it. Remembering Allah also protects the heart from loneliness. Loneliness agitates the mind with endless thoughts. Dhikr reminds the believer of divine companionship. Allah is closer than anyone else. This closeness comforts the heart. Comfort reduces mental noise. The believer no longer feels abandoned with their thoughts. They feel accompanied by Allah. This companionship is calming. It changes the inner atmosphere from isolation to connection. When remembrance becomes habitual, calm becomes familiar. The heart no longer panics easily. It knows where to turn when discomfort arises. This familiarity stabilizes the mind. Islam teaches us consistency in dhikr because consistency builds emotional resilience. A resilient heart does not crumble under pressure. A resilient heart keeps the mind steady even when circumstances shake. This resilience is a gift from Allah to those who remember Him regularly. Remembering Allah also restores gratitude. Gratitude shifts focus from fear to provision. Fear agitates the mind, gratitude calms it. Dhikr naturally awakens gratitude. The heart remembers blessings instead of threats. This remembrance changes perception. When perception softens, thoughts slow. Allah designed remembrance to redirect attention gently. It does not suppress thoughts, it reshapes them. The heart that remembers Allah becomes trusting. Trust removes the need for constant mental checking. The believer no longer scans the future obsessively. They accept uncertainty with faith. This acceptance calms the mind profoundly. Islam teaches us that trust is peace in motion. When trust fills the heart, the mind rests in confidence rather than fear. Even during hardship, remembrance steadies the heart. Hardship shakes emotions, but dhikr anchors them. Anchored emotions protect the mind from spiraling. The believer may still feel pain, but they are not consumed by it. This distinction is powerful. It shows that calm does not mean absence of struggle, it means presence of trust. Allah grants this calm to hearts that remember Him sincerely. Remembering Allah also brings humility. Humility reduces mental strain because the believer stops demanding control. The heart accepts its limits. Acceptance calms frustration. Frustration agitates the mind. Dhikr replaces frustration with submission. Submission brings peace. This peace flows upward into the mind naturally. As remembrance deepens, the believer notices that thoughts lose their urgency. Problems no longer shout, they whisper. This change is not magic. It is the result of a heart that feels safe with Allah. Safety calms everything else. The mind follows where the heart leads. In the end, remembering Allah calms the heart before it calms the mind, because Allah designed peace to begin at the core. When the heart reconnects with Him, everything else falls into place. Thoughts slow, worries soften, and calm settles gently. And that calm remains not because life became quiet, but because the heart returned to its Creator. You are not required to control the future. Many hearts feel exhausted not because of what is happening now, but because of the pressure to control what comes next. Islam teaches us a freeing truth. You were never required to control the future. Allah alone controls what is written, what unfolds, and what is delayed. When the believer forgets this, the mind becomes restless. It plans excessively, worries constantly, and fears outcomes that may never arrive. This burden was never meant for the human heart. Allah did not create you to carry tomorrow on your shoulders. He created you to trust Him today. When you accept this, something softens inside. The heart stops racing ahead of time and returns to the present moment. Trusting Allah with the future is not negligence, it is obedience. It allows you to do what is required now without drowning in what might happen later. This understanding brings relief that no amount of planning can replace. Overthinking often comes from the illusion that control equals safety. The believer may feel that if they plan enough, worry enough, or prepare for every scenario, they can avoid pain. Islam gently corrects this belief. Pain, ease, delay, and success are all part of Allah's decree. No amount of mental effort can override divine wisdom. When you realize this, the need to control the future begins to fade. You still take responsibility, but you release obsession. You do your part and leave the rest to Allah. This balance is what Islam calls tawakkul. Tawakkul does not cancel effort, it completes it. Once effort is made, peace follows because the outcome no longer belongs to you. It belongs to Allah, who knows you better than you know yourself. Trying to control the future often steals peace from the present. The believer may miss today's blessings while worrying about tomorrow's problems. Islam teaches us that each day comes with its own mercy and its own test. Allah did not ask you to live tomorrow today. When the heart accepts this, it relaxes. The mind stops jumping ahead and starts settling where it is. This presence allows gratitude to grow. Gratitude calms anxiety. Anxiety thrives on imagined futures. When trust replaces imagination, calm follows naturally. Allah wants His servants grounded, not scattered across time. Letting go of future control brings the heart back to now. Fear is often the fuel behind the desire to control. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of disappointment. Islam teaches us that fear should lead us to Allah, not away from Him. When fear pushes the believer to control everything, it overwhelms the soul. When fear pushes the believer to trust Allah, it becomes manageable. Trust transforms fear into caution and hope. The believer learns that Allah's plan does not need constant supervision. It unfolds with wisdom even when we do not understand it. This realization calms the heart deeply. The future no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a space held by Allah's care. Allah never promised us certainty about outcomes, but He promised us guidance through uncertainty. When the believer tries to control the future, they are often seeking certainty. Islam teaches us that certainty comes from faith, not foresight. You do not need to know what will happen to be at peace. You need to know who is in control. When that truth settles in the heart, the mind stops demanding answers. Silence replaces mental noise. The believer learns to live with unanswered questions without panic. This is spiritual maturity. It allows calm to exist even when the path ahead is unclear. Planning is encouraged in Islam, but obsession is not. There is a clear difference. Planning is thoughtful, obsession is fearful. Planning respects Allah's decree, obsession challenges it. When the believer confuses the two, stress enters the heart. Islam restores balance by teaching intention, effort, and surrender. You plan responsibly, then you trust completely. This sequence is essential. Skipping surrender keeps the mind busy even after effort is complete. Trust finishes what effort starts. When trust is present, the heart rests, knowing that Allah will carry what remains undone. Many people feel guilty for not worrying about the future, as if worry proves seriousness. Islam teaches us that excessive worry is not seriousness, it is misplaced reliance. Allah does not reward worry. He rewards trust, patience, and effort. When the believer understands this, they give themselves permission to rest. Rest is not laziness, rest is confidence in Allah. A rested heart thinks clearly, prays sincerely, and lives fully. This rest becomes possible only when the need to control the future is released. Trying to control the future also keeps the believer emotionally tense. The body may be still, but the mind is constantly alert. Islam teaches us that Allah did not create you to live in a constant state of tension. He created you for worship, connection, and balance. When you accept that the future is Allah's responsibility, tension eases. The heart becomes softer. The mind slows. This calm improves worship because the believer is no longer distracted by endless mental scenarios. Presence returns. Presence deepens faith. Delays often trigger the urge to control. When something does not happen on time, the believer may start questioning, planning, and worrying excessively. Islam teaches us that delays are not denials. They are part of divine timing. When you trust Allah's timing, the need to force outcomes disappears. Forcing leads to frustration. Trust leads to patience. Patience strengthens the soul. Allah loves patient hearts because they rely on Him rather than rushing His plan. Accepting delays calms the mind and restores emotional balance. Letting go of future control also protects the heart from disappointment. Expectations create pressure. When expectations are rigid, disappointment feels devastating. Islam teaches us to hope without demanding. Hope is gentle, demands are heavy. When you hope while trusting Allah, your heart remains flexible. Outcomes do not break you. This flexibility is strength. It allows the believer to adapt with faith rather than collapse in fear. Allah grants this resilience to those who trust Him sincerely. When the believer stops trying to control the future, they regain energy. Mental energy once spent on worry becomes available for growth. This energy is invested in worship, learning, and self-improvement. Islam encourages progress, not paralysis. Overthinking the future paralyzes action. Trusting Allah liberates it. You move forward calmly, doing what you can today without being crushed by tomorrow. Control also feeds the ego's desire to feel powerful. Islam teaches humility. True humility is recognizing limits and trusting Allah beyond them. When you stop trying to control the future, humility grows. Humility softens the heart. A soft heart is receptive to guidance. Guidance brings clarity. Clarity calms the mind. This cycle strengthens Iman and reduces anxiety. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to tie the camel and trust Allah. This teaching captures the balance perfectly. You act responsibly, then you trust fully. Control ends where trust begins. When the believer lives by this principle, life becomes lighter. The future no longer feels threatening. It becomes a place where Allah's wisdom will appear just as it always has. As trust deepens, the believer notices that calm becomes more frequent, thoughts lose urgency, fear loses intensity, the heart feels supported. This support does not come from certainty but from faith. Allah becomes the anchor. Anchors do not move storms, they keep the ship steady through them. In the end, you are not required to control the future because it was never yours to manage. Allah holds it with perfect knowledge and mercy. When you release what you cannot control and trust the one who can, the heart rests, the mind quiets, and life feels lighter. And that peace is one of the greatest gifts Allah gives to those who rely on Him. Silence and reflection heal mental noise. Mental noise grows when the heart is constantly exposed to stimulation, opinion, and pressure. Islam teaches us that silence is not emptiness, it is space for healing. When life becomes loud, the soul becomes tired. Endless conversations, scrolling, arguments, and worries clutter the mind until clarity disappears. Silence gently clears this clutter. It allows the heart to breathe again. In silence, the believer is no longer reacting, they are listening. This listening is not always to the world, but to the inner state that has been ignored. Allah created silence as a mercy, not as loneliness. When the believer embraces silence intentionally, mental noise begins to soften. Thoughts slow because they are no longer being fed by constant input. Reflection then finds room to enter. Reflection is where understanding begins. Understanding calms the heart, and when the heart calms, the mind follows naturally. Reflection is different from overthinking. Overthinking repeats without direction, while reflection observes with purpose. Islam encourages reflection because it leads to wisdom, not anxiety. When the believer reflects, they are not judging themselves harshly or replaying mistakes endlessly. They are gently examining their state with honesty and mercy. Reflection allows lessons to surface without pressure. Silence makes this possible. Without silence, reflection cannot occur. Mental noise blocks insight. Allah invites believers to pause so they may see clearly. In reflection, the heart recognizes what truly matters and what can be released. This recognition reduces mental strain. The mind stops fighting everything at once and starts understanding one thing at a time. Peace grows from this clarity. Mental noise often comes from trying to respond to everything. Islam teaches us that not everything deserves a response. Silence creates boundaries for the mind. When the believer stops responding to every thought, every message, and every opinion, the mind regains strength. Silence teaches the heart restraint. Restraint brings dignity. Dignity brings calm. Reflection then reshapes perspective. What once felt urgent no longer feels important. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Allah places wisdom in quiet moments, not in chaos. Those moments heal the mind gently, without force. Silence also allows the believer to reconnect with intention. Noise distracts from intention. When the heart is quiet, intention becomes clearer. Islam values intention deeply because actions are shaped by it. Reflection restores intention by removing distractions. The believer remembers why they act, speak, and strive. This remembrance aligns the heart with Allah. Alignment brings peace. Peace reduces mental noise. When intention is clear, the mind no longer argues with itself. It moves with purpose instead of confusion. Many people fear silence because it exposes what they have been avoiding. But Islam teaches us that healing begins when we face ourselves with honesty. Reflection in silence allows emotions to surface safely. Pain, sadness, and confusion are acknowledged rather than suppressed. Suppressed emotions create mental noise. Acknowledged emotions release it. Allah does not ask us to deny pain. He asks us to bring it to Him. Silence provides the space to do so. Reflection turns pain into understanding. Understanding brings relief. Relief calms the mind. Silence also reduces comparison. Noise constantly shows us how others live. think, and succeed. Comparison feeds mental unrest. Islam teaches us contentment. Contentment grows in quiet spaces. When the believer steps away from noise, they stop measuring themselves against others. Reflection reminds them of their own journey. This reminder strengthens gratitude. Gratitude softens anxiety. The mind becomes calmer when it focuses on blessings rather than differences. Allah increases peace in hearts that are grateful and reflective. Reflection allows the believer to recognize patterns. In noise, patterns are missed. In silence, they become visible. The believer begins to see what drains them, what benefits them, and what needs to change. This awareness empowers healthy decisions. Islam encourages self-awareness because it leads to growth. Growth requires clarity. Clarity comes from reflection. Mental noise fades when the believer understands themselves better. Confusion decreases, direction increases, calm follows. Silence also protects the heart from emotional overload. Constant engagement exhausts the soul. Islam values balance. Silence restores balance by allowing rest. Rest is not weakness, it is renewal. A rested heart thinks clearly. Clear thinking reduces mental clutter. Allah designed silence as a form of mercy so that hearts may recover. When the believer honors this mercy, mental strength returns gradually. Thoughts become orderly instead of chaotic. Reflection deepens faith. In silence, the believer remembers Allah's past help, answered prayers, and hidden protection. This remembrance strengthens trust. Trust reduces worry. Worry fuels mental noise. When trust grows, noise fades. The believer realizes that Allah has always been present even when the mind felt overwhelmed. This realization brings reassurance. Reassurance quiets the heart. Quiet hearts produce calm minds. Silence also refines speech. When the believer becomes comfortable with silence, they speak less impulsively. Impulsive speech creates regret and mental unrest. Islam teaches thoughtful speech. Reflection sharpens this quality. The believer learns to pause before speaking, just as they pause before reacting. This pause protects peace. Peace reduces inner conflict. The mind becomes less cluttered because fewer regrets are created. Reflection allows the believer to forgive themselves. Mental noise often comes from unresolved guilt. Islam teaches repentance and mercy. In silence, the believer can turn inward and seek forgiveness sincerely. Allah loves repentance done quietly with humility. When forgiveness is felt, mental heaviness lifts. The mind becomes lighter, shame fades, hope returns. This healing cannot happen in constant noise. It requires stillness. Silence also strengthens emotional independence. When noise fades, the believer relies less on external validation. Reflection reminds them that Allah's approval matters most. This shift reduces anxiety about opinions. Anxiety fuels mental noise. Trust in Allah silences it. The believer becomes steadier, less reactive, and more grounded. This grounding stabilizes the mind. Over time, silence becomes familiar rather than uncomfortable. The believer learns to sit with their thoughts without being overwhelmed. Reflection becomes a habit. Mental noise no longer dominates. Calm becomes the default. Islam encourages moments of solitude for this reason. Solitude is where hearts heal quietly. Silence and reflection also improve worship. A calm mind prays with presence. Presence deepens connection. Connection brings peace. Peace reinforces calm thinking. This cycle strengthens faith continuously. Allah invites believers into silence so they may hear guidance more clearly. Guidance brings certainty. Certainty quiets the mind. In the end, silence and reflection heal mental noise because they return the heart to its natural state of balance. Noise pulls the heart outward. Silence brings it home. When the believer honors quiet moments and reflects with sincerity, Allah replaces confusion with clarity, heaviness with calm, and mental chaos with gentle peace that settles deeply and lasts. Peace comes when you hand your worries to Allah. Peace begins when the believer realizes that worry was never meant to be a lifelong companion. Islam teaches us that the heart becomes heavy when it carries what Allah never assigned it to hold. Worries multiply when we try to manage outcomes, control people, and predict the future all at once. Handing your worries to Allah is not giving up. It is returning responsibility to its rightful owner. Allah knows what keeps you awake at night and what you hide behind forced smiles. When you place those worries before Him, the heart feels acknowledged and supported. This support calms the soul. Peace does not arrive because problems vanish, but because the believer no longer feels alone with them. Trusting Allah with your worries softens fear and restores balance. The heart begins to breathe again, and the mind slowly releases its grip on anxiety. Many people confuse worry with care, believing that constant concern proves responsibility. Islam gently corrects this misunderstanding. True care is doing what is required and trusting Allah with what follows. Worry beyond effort is not devotion, it is exhaustion. When you hand your worries to Allah, you separate effort from obsession. You act where you can and surrender where you cannot. This surrender brings peace because it ends the inner struggle. The believer stops arguing with reality and starts accepting Allah's wisdom. Acceptance calms resistance. Resistance fuels anxiety. When resistance ends, peace enters naturally. Allah never promised a life without trials, but He promised hearts that find rest when they rely on Him sincerely. Worry grows when the believer forgets Allah's attributes. Allah is all-knowing, all-wise, and all-merciful. When these truths fade, the heart panics. Handing worries to Allah is an act of remembering who He is. When you remember that Allah sees what you cannot, plans what you do not understand, and protects what you may never notice, fear loses its grip. The heart no longer feels responsible for every outcome. This release is deeply calming. The believer realizes that Allah's care is constant even when circumstances are uncertain. Peace grows from this awareness. It settles gently, replacing tension with trust. Handing your worries to Allah also breaks the cycle of overthinking. Overthinking is the mind's attempt to solve what the heart refuses to surrender. Islam teaches us that some matters are resolved through prayer, not analysis. When worries are handed to Allah, the mind no longer needs to replay every scenario. It rests. This rest is not laziness, it is faith in action. The believer continues their duties without carrying unnecessary mental weight. Allah rewards this trust with tranquility. Tranquility steadies emotions and clears thoughts. The inner storm quiets because the heart knows it is not alone. Worry often comes from fear of loss of security, relationships, health, or direction. Islam teaches us that nothing leaves our lives without Allah's permission. When you hand your worries to Allah, you accept that what stays is by His mercy and what leaves is by His wisdom. This acceptance brings peace because it removes shock from change. Change becomes part of divine care rather than a threat. The believer learns to trust Allah even when outcomes differ from expectations. This trust protects the heart from breaking under uncertainty. Peace follows acceptance faithfully. Handing worries to Allah also restores humility. Worry is often rooted in the belief that everything depends on us. Islam teaches humility by reminding us of our limits. Recognizing limits is freeing. When you admit that you cannot control everything, you stop exhausting yourself trying. Allah does not ask you to be all-powerful, He asks you to be faithful. Faith replaces pressure with peace. The heart softens when it stops pretending to be in control. This softness allows calm to enter deeply. When worries are handed to Allah, prayer changes. Du'a becomes sincere rather than desperate. The believer no longer demands specific outcomes but asks for what is best. This shift brings emotional relief. Trusting Allah's choice reduces anxiety about results. The heart feels safe knowing that Allah's decision will be kinder than its fears. This safety is peace. It allows the believer to move forward calmly, even when answers are delayed. Delay no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like divine timing. Worry also steals gratitude. When the mind is consumed by what might go wrong, it forgets what is already right. Handing worries to Allah clears space for gratitude to return. Gratitude calms the heart because it reminds the believer of Allah's ongoing mercy. Islam teaches that gratitude attracts barakah. Barakah stabilizes life. Stability reduces fear. Fear feeds worry. When gratitude grows, worry weakens, peace settles naturally in a grateful heart. Handing your worries to Allah also heals emotional fatigue. Carrying unresolved concerns drains energy slowly. Islam teaches balance because exhaustion weakens faith. When you release worries through trust, emotional strength returns. The believer feels lighter, more present, and more focused. This focus improves worship, relationships, and decision-making. Peace improves everything it touches. Allah wants His servants emotionally stable so they can worship Him with presence. Letting go of worry makes this stability possible. Some worries are tied to the past, others to the future. Islam teaches us to live in the present with trust. When worries are handed to Allah, the heart returns to now. The past is forgiven and the future is entrusted. This return brings peace because the present is the only place where Allah asks you to act. The believer stops being pulled in opposite directions mentally. Calm replaces confusion. Direction becomes clear. Handing worries to Allah does not remove responsibility, it removes despair. The believer still works, plans and strives, but despair no longer accompanies effort. Hope replaces it. Hope calms the heart. Islam encourages hope because it strengthens patience. Patience steadies the soul. A steady soul experiences peace even during difficulty. Allah places peace in hearts that combine effort with trust. As trust deepens, the believer notices that worries lose intensity. They may still arise, but they no longer dominate. The heart has learned where to place them. This learning is spiritual growth. Allah nurtures this growth through repeated surrender. Each time you hand a worry to Allah, peace grows stronger. The heart becomes familiar with reliance. Familiarity brings confidence. Confidence brings calm. Peace also grows when the believer stops asking why and starts trusting who. Islam teaches us that not all wisdom is revealed immediately. Trusting Allah without full understanding calms the heart because it accepts mystery without fear. This acceptance is a sign of mature faith. Mature faith rests even when answers are incomplete. Rest is peace. Over time, the believer realizes that many worries never came true. This realization strengthens trust further. Allah protected them in ways they never anticipated. Remembering this protection builds confidence in Allah's care. Confidence reduces future worry. Peace becomes a habit rather than an exception. Allah replaces anxiety with assurance for those who rely on Him. In the end, peace comes when you hand your worries to Allah because the heart returns to where it belongs. It was never meant to carry everything. When you trust Allah fully, He replaces worry with calm, fear with reassurance, and heaviness with lightness. And that peace remains not because life is perfect, but because the heart is resting with its Creator. My dear brothers and sisters, the storm inside your mind does not mean you are weak. It means your heart is searching for rest. Allah never created you to carry every fear, every outcome, and every unanswered question on your own. When you stop wrestling with your thoughts and start placing them in Allah's hands, something gentle happens inside you. The mind slows down, the heart softens, and peace begins to replace panic. Life may not become perfect, but your soul becomes steady. So return to dhikr, return to prayer, return to trust. Let Allah quiet what you cannot control. Because when your heart rests with Him, even the loudest storm inside your mind begins to fade into calm.